likely grown up hearing that things will come to pass if the Lord is willing and the creek doesn't rise. It might be something you've heard uttered by a grandparent who wished to let you know that even the best laid plan of man can fail in their fruition. Because of course, sometimes the creek does rise. Man plans and God laughs. Sometime in 1903, the building that housed Clear Branch Baptist Church burned down. Many of that congregation sought to join the assembly of Little Bahaley Baptist Church. Families located on the south side of Bahaley Creek had to brave a swollen creek after hard rains. Would these families that were connected by geography find themselves scattered to Little Bahaley Baptist, or to Union Hall Church, or to the church at Fair River as they tried to work through their faith after a fire? No, they'd step out in confidence and create something new in 1903 under the leadership of the guiding hand of a providential God. They would found Hikes Retreat Baptist Church. The names of those founding families are surnames that are familiar still to us 120 years later. Oberschmidt, Haley, Stepp, Bullock, Smith, Herring, Crawford. The first time they came together, it was under a brush arbor, a rudimentary tangle of vines and branches, shaped into an altar of sorts to give the worshipers a point to gather at. Imagine them for a second in your mind's eye. Wagons and mules and horses were the transportation of the day. They must have been spread out on blankets along the ground and around the brush arbor together in family units as they sang hymns and listened to the Word of God preached. In much of its first 40 years, Hikes Retreat was served by a variety of different traveling preachers who taught the Word of God at a rotating list of churches. In 1948, for the first time, Hikes Retreat called a full-time pastor to lead the congregation.
Well, what has started underneath a humble brush arbor all the way back in 1903 has blossomed into a local church that has demonstrated and declared the gospel of Jesus Christ in Brookhaven and beyond for 120 years. In that time period, there have been 30 senior pastors that have led Hikes Retreat Baptist Church to do what God has called them to do here in Brookhaven and beyond. All the way back, beginning with a man named W.R. Weber and John M. Mayfield, all the way through the course of history of our church with Ken Kirk and Ken Parvin, and then finally ending with myself, Jonathan Gary. God has used different men all along the way to lead our church to do what God has called us to do and to be who God has called us to be. One of the things I love about thinking about the past is that the past always tells a story. And the story that the past tells is really, I think it's in a lot of ways encompassed in the word history. It's His story, God's story. And as we look back on our past as a church, what we see is God's story of His faithfulness to us as a church family for a very long time. And although we don't live in the past, we do look to the past. And then all along the way, each pastor as they came led the church to take the next right step. And as they've taken those steps, the accumulation of them all have led to who we are today, that we are a church that has indeed always been about making the gospel of Jesus known in Brookhaven and far beyond. And that's who we want to continue to be. As we consider what God is calling us to do right here in this moment, we want to be faithful to take our next right step because that's what God calls us to do, and it's who He calls us to be. And as we do that, I think over the course of the next 120 years, we'll be shocked at each step along the way of what all God has done in us and through us as a church family right here in Brookhaven and beyond.
Little Bahaley Creek begins as a stream fed by other smaller branches as it winds through Lincoln County. Then it feeds into the larger Big Bahaley Creek that later feeds into the Pearl River, which leads to the Gulf of Mexico. Just as a trickle from a small stream in northern Lincoln County will one day find itself to the greater waters that cover the earth, so it is with the story of Hikes Retreat Baptist Church over the last 120 years. In Habakkuk 2:14 it says, "For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord's glory as the water covers the sea," starting right here in Brookhaven, but going far beyond.